So now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker. Dr. Joanne Slavin is a professor in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition at the University of Minnesota, where she focuses on nutrition and community outreach. She's authored more than 350 scientific articles on dietary fiber, carbohydrates, whole grains, protein, snacking, gut health, brain health, all sorts of really good things. We got the whole caboodle here. And she has also served on numerous boards while owning and operating a family farm that she grew up on. So, not like goals or anything right here. So today she will help us think about where ingredient safety can be part of the everyday nutrition story and how we can share it with the public without making things more complicated than they need to be.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know about the sound people, but I'll probably drop this if I hold it. So why don't you tell me, is it okay if I just put it here? Or? All right. I'll promise not to move. I know I will. Thanks for inviting me here. It's really great to be along with the Spartans. And it's really nice to have all these wonderful students here because you guys are the future. So hopefully when you leave here, you'll see your role, and there's a lot to do in this. So great to be here. Let's see. So this is my background. You already heard about this, and I do want to say that I learned a ton being on the dietary guidelines. And nobody really knows how I got on there because I have a lot of industry. I've always worked with industry, and they're like, I can't believe they let you on there because you are kind of a plant. But it's an amazing process, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as we go through here. Who don't I work for? People are like, yeah, do you work for anybody? And I said, I'm really fortunate because I've had all these students and they invite me in, and I learned so much when I'm on scientific advisory boards and getting out into the real world. So when I sit in my office, I have wonderful students, I learn a lot, but I really appreciate all the research funding I've gotten from different commodity groups, industry groups, and without that, I would be not where I am today. Right now I'm on these Simply Good Foods, which hate carbohydrates. People are like, aren't you the carbohydrate lady? How can you go work for those people? I learned a ton from those people. Sustainable Nutrition Scientific Board, Kenvu on fiber, and Olipop on fiber. So nice to be there. And I also now own and manage my family farm, which is in Walworth, Wisconsin. So, human nutrition. I've been in human nutrition my whole life, and the thing that's humans are amazing because we're omnivores, so we can almost eat anything. We do really well on anything. We're very similar to pigs. Best way to study us is to study pigs because they have a very similar digestive tract. We're monogastrics. So what are our basic nutrition needs? We got to get protein. We need 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight every day. Get it at every meal. Protein is important. Generally not a problem in the US, but it can be a problem. And then carbohydrates and fats, it's kind of a mix. It's not that big a deal. If you look at what people have done well on, some of the Arctic diets, 80% of the calories came from fat. Some of the African diets people have studied, 80% of the calories came from carbohydrates, and people did just fine if they got protein and the vitamins and minerals they need. So it's kind of nice, but it's also a little frustrating because people like us to dial it down and say, hey, exactly what should we eat? So for good nutrition, make sure you get the right number of calories, enough protein, and the vitamins and minerals that are needed. I just want to point out some important times. 1941, when the RDAs came out, nutrients do matter. All of this new talk is like nobody cares about nutrients. That's because we've done such a good job of getting nutrients to people in the US, but we really do have to get them. So the quantity of nutrients you need to consume daily to make sure basic good health, proper growth, reproductive success, and prevent nutrient deficiency diseases. People are like, that's so old. I mean, how old are you? Let's get off of nutrient deficiency diseases. Those are gone because we have fortified and enriched the food supply. And once we get rid of that, we will get them back again. Those are really important. That is, we're not done. This is when politics get involved, 1977. Most of you guys weren't alive. I just happened to be alive at this time, and it was a U.S. Senate Select Committee that was run by Senator George McGovern from South Dakota that came up with the dietary goals for Americans. There were no scientists, no nutritionists in the room. They were not allowed in. And what did they say? The underlying premise for this work was too much fat, too much sugar or salt can be and are linked directly to heart disease, cancer, obesity, stroke, among other killer diseases. Wow, that's a big deal, right? We're killing ourselves with what we're eating. We better do something. So from then, 1977, we get to the dietary guidelines in 1980, which basically said, hey, make sure you don't get too much sugar, too much sodium, too much fat, blah, blah, blah. Absolutely. So I just want to point out, too, that this idea of taking the science to the person has always been a long journey, and we're all part of getting it there. So over on my left here, you can see that's the dietary reference intakes, the RDAs, and they're kind of static science. They don't change. I mean, vitamin C requirement's not going to change overnight. We already got that. So those things, they haven't been updated since 2000. They really don't need to be updated unless there's some new science. In the middle, you see the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report, which is the science background that the committee puts together to inform the dietary guidelines. Dietary guidelines put out by the government, that science committee has no role in that. I mean, they do all the science background, do the science dance in the background, but they don't make any of those requirements, they're not involved in that. And then we have my plate. And a lot of this, when you're a science person like I was in a lab thinking, this is so stupid. This is really, nobody cares about the dietary guidelines. Who cares about the plate? Who cares? Well, it's really important. So that's where I want to encourage you to understand this. Remember, the dietary guidelines only use human data. No animal data can be used in the dietary guidelines. So the RDAs, you definitely use it. How do we get protein requirements? We use animals. How do we get all this? We use animals. We can't use that in the dietary guidelines. So you bring all this information together and say, is there new science that we should change a dietary guidelines? And you'll notice since 1980, they really haven't changed very much, which isn't too surprising. But you can do modeling, looking at systematic reviews, all of those things will work. You end up with the dietary guidelines. Got to tell you that they haven't changed much since 1980. They really haven't. 4 nutrients of concern always come up: calcium, vitamin D, potassium, dietary fiber. Those every year, we don't get enough of those. So it's great for my business because you guys need more fiber. So good, call me and I can help you with that. But those don't change, and those are nutrients of concern. We don't get enough. We got to do something. But then the things, what do we get too much of? So sat fat, less than 10% per day. Trans fat, got rid of those, as low as possible. Added sugar came in 2015, less than 10% of your calories, and then sodium, less than 2,300. But you see over time the shift from nutrients into dietary patterns, which is good because people eat foods, but it's also really hard to study because no one food is necessary in our diet, and getting rid of any one food's not going to really change things that much. This is where I want to convince you that the dietary guidelines do matter and policy does matter. As somebody that sits in a university is like, I don't care about that. The dietary guidelines dictate everything in what we have to do, right? So if we look at the SNAP program, the WIC program, the school lunch program has to go along with the dietary guidelines. So of course we can't flip the dietary guidelines overnight and say, hey, you need twice as much of this. They have to stay with that. Same thing for the nutrition facts panel. It gets changed when the dietary guidelines has an authoritative statement that says we don't get enough of this or we get too much of this. You'll see changes on the nutrition facts. Same thing with my plate. My plate really does matter because it's the number of servings that you have to provide to get the nutrients you need. I just wanted to point this out that, all of these things are going into the dietary guidelines. It's a volunteer activity. When you work on that scientific advisory board, you volunteer just a ton of time to go through these reviews. There's staff that helps you, but it's actually a ton of work to bring all that together and say, is there some new science that's going to make us change policy? So I want to put this one in because it's a new question. People are like, nothing ever changed in the dietary guidelines. Yeah, it's an open process. Throw in a question, they'll try to get it in if they can. And this year they said, yeah, the last one, we will get in a question on ultra-processed foods. So here's the question. What is the relationship between consumption of dietary patterns with varying amounts of ultra-processed foods and growth, size, body composition, risk of overweight, obesity, weight loss, and maintenance? There's a question. And what they found is we don't really have enough information to move on this. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of consumers' questions on this, but there's so many different classification systems out there, none of them that have been accepted as the one, so that we are unable to develop recommendations about ultra-processed foods. That is in the scientific advisory report, but the government, and they can decide what they want to do, but that is the science background that is in that report. So I want to get to this just because I'm actually on sabbatical this year working on ultra-processed foods for some odd reason, but it's okay. There's a lot going on. So here is the NOVA system of food classifications. So NOVA 1, 2, 3, 4, and obviously I don't want, it's not like a grade that I'm getting an A if I'm on category 4. Ultra-processed, nobody wants to be there. So what does this mean? And if you go into the definitions, it really doesn't make any sense if you're a food scientist. Like, what? This was developed in Brazil by people that are public health people that really have never worked in a food plant or ever had their own farm to try to figure out how does my stuff get into this category. Unprocessed, minimally processed, but it's very judgmental. It's like these are the good processing techniques that we think are good to get into number 1. So if you fortify with iron and folic acid, you're out, even though that's required by the law. It's like, okay, you're out. Processed culinary ingredients, if you press, extract, these are fine, but you can't do it in ways that people actually use in a plant because that's not possible. Processed, everything we eat is going to at least be in this category for sure. So we want minimally processed foods. So if you have a canned vegetable without sodium, you may get into this, but otherwise most things don't get into this. So most of the foods people eat are in category 4. And this is really like proxy for junk food, right? We've been here before. This is bad food. This is junk food. Don't eat it. So what is it? Made by industrial use type things, industrial processes, and anything that's packaged, chocolate, ice cream, buns, cakes, cereal, milk, pretty much, everything people eat will be in category 4. I have had some wonderful students, and this is really my claim to fame. Julie Hess, one of my students that I worked with, and I'm actually working with her on sabbatical this year on ultra-processed foods, but what we worked on is a proof of concept study where we developed a list of foods that fit NOVA category 4. So, but we also, these foods had to be recommended within the Dietary Guidelines 2020 and ones that people would consume. So if you look at the diets that we put together as a dietitian, 7-day diets that people would actually consume over time. And 2,000 calories, 7-day menu, 91% of the foods would be in the ultra-processed category, but they were recommended by the Dietary Guidelines, and the Healthy Eating Index was actually an 86 on this, and that is a way that you score based on the Dietary Guidelines. How did we lose points? Too much sodium and not enough whole grains, but the point of this is people can eat ultra-processed foods and still have very healthy diets if we go into this category. I got to get on to MAHA because the rules are changed. So you guys are playing in the old rules. It's a new game. So whatever your handicap is, it's different now. You got to play. So if you read the MAHA report, and I think you'll hear about it as it moves forward, ultra-processed foods are formulated for shelf life and palatability. If you're in the food business, of course, right? Isn't that good? Isn't that what we want? But they're high in added sugars, refined grains, unhealthy fats, sodium, and low in fiber and essential nutrients. Okay, so this idea of everything in there, and these are just some examples of how did we get here, and can anybody raise their hand and say this is really going in the wrong direction? For sure, but we want minimally processed animal-based sources of fat such as butter and lard. It's like, wow, that's a total shift. Where's the science on that? How do we get there? And then we have to get rid of refined seed oils. So since I teach advanced human nutrition, about a year ago, one of my students said, why aren't you getting seed oils out of the food supply? You're just sitting here teaching me wrong information. What are you doing? And I thought, what is it about seed oils is there something new on seed oils? I ought to go find it. So, all these things that are very top of mind on consumers are all of a sudden teed up to be done away with. So all of these seed oils are in a really bad place because of rules and relationships with inflammation. And there's always scientific data here. You can get into animal studies in inflammation and say which types of oils are healthier, which are not. But to say we have to get rid of all seed oils because of inflammation is obviously not science-based. This is where you guys come in. All of a sudden, food additives are really there. Before, it was we nutrition people were in the hot seat. Get rid of saturated fat, get rid of sodium, get rid of added sugar. And now it's like, that's like child's play. These are the big guns we got to go after. So who do we want to go after? And this is right out of the MAHA report. This isn't me, that's why it's in quotes. Certain food additives are linked to increased risks of Mental disorders, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, even cancer. Okay, who are the ones teed up in there? Food colorings, red 40, titanium dioxide, as you go, BHT, and artificial sweeteners, right? And now, for me, having been on the dietary guidelines and writing the sugar thing, obviously, if we want to get rid of added sugars, we need alternatives for people. So to tee these up without any data, like these have to go because they're bad, it's like, oh, wait a second, that's not fair. So, and then these are the good foods, right? These are the good guys that are listed. Leafy greens, salmon, legumes, nuts, beef. It's like, how did they get there? How did they get moved in? I don't know. Maybe somebody owns a beef ranch. I don't know. Whole milk and other dairy products. And it's like, wait a second. The reason we don't support whole milk is to take calories out. We know that the nutrient density is higher. I'm a nutritionist, and skim milk versus whole milk, but we're not saying if you're obese, we don't want you to consume whole milk. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? And then this thing really does torque me, because having been on the dietary guidelines, it is an amazing process. It is transparent, it is good. Every other country really does depend on that information. So they say the dietary guidelines have a history of being unduly influenced by corporate interests. Not true. Making little distinction between industrial processed foods and home-cooked or whole foods if their nutrient profiles look similar. Of course, right? Whether you make your lasagna or Nestle makes it for you, the nutrients are what we care about in the composition. So just because it's quick cook or, of course we don't differentiate between that. All right, so I'm going to end up on, if we said, okay, let's get rid of all ultra-processed foods, which would be most of what people eat, we can't do our enrichment and fortification that has gotten rid of our nutrient deficiency diseases over time. All these nutrients of concern, fiber, potassium, calcium, and vitamin D, we don't get enough of. Therefore, we will lose out if we say we're going to take that out of foods and not allow it. If you're in the plant protein world, plant proteins are not digested and absorbed very well. To get good plant proteins, you need ultra-processing. Look at everything. We got to ultra-process the crap out of that to get it into a higher protein quality. So it's really important to not get rid of that whole industry, because we can't do that. And then we can't put in healthy ingredients, and all these things we want to get rid of are also not possible. I'm going to end up on just dietary guidance. 1916, Foods for Young Children, USDA's first document. We've always cared the most about children. MAHA does not own this. All of a sudden they're like, hey, you guys don't care about kids. Give me a break. We've always cared about kids. We care greatly about kids, and we want to make sure they get the nutrients. So giving people advice on what should you eat, we are omnivores, so we want to make sure that people have the resources to eat the food they need, and they get this variety of foods that will bring in nutrients. I really like the 1992, this idea that carbohydrates are the base, because we can do very well on carbohydrates and build that up. The other high protein, expensive ingredients we don't need as much. I told you my plate matters. It affects all of policy, and I have good friends in Canada, but I beat them up a lot on this because they said, get water instead of milk as your drink. It has nothing to do with that, guys. They should have put the dairy on the plate in another piece of pie. The reason you need the dairy serving is for calcium and vitamin D. I mean, it's not the drink. So no matter how you do this, you're going to get yourself into trouble. So just to finish up, dietary guidelines have been around since 1980, but I think you're going to see huge changes. I really expect, I don't even like to turn on the news anymore, but ultra-processed foods and food additives are now teed up, and that's a new game. It's really a huge change from anywhere we've ever been before. But what's really scary to me is you're getting all this stuff on the state level, where things are getting banned on the state level. Texas, Louisiana, which you cannot do business, you can't function, nothing will work having this chaos that you've already heard about. And all the things, food safety, food costs, food waste, supply chain challenges, consumer confusion. Consumers have no trust in us. They're like, you guys don't know what you're doing. But the way I feel about it is that we can just go back to the idea that I started an extension and we all need to know how to cook. Absolutely. Tell people we want them to get better connected with their food supply, and we care about their kids, and we really are here for them. So convincing them, and just like we had this wonderful lunch, no reason not to enjoy eating. So thanks for your attention.
Joanne, maybe before you step off the stage. We do have time for one or two clarifying questions. We will have a panel discussion at the end, but if anybody has one. Oh.
On one of your slides, I think, I saw something about hyperactivity and titanium oxide. What is the basis for that?
Those were not linked. Those were, we have experts here in the audience. Titanium dioxide, remember, none of this is linked to anything in the human. This is what really frustrates me if you look at ultra-processed foods and what is it about ultra-processed foods that would have any effect at all, we have no data that eating ultra-processed foods affects children's health, right? So this is the frustrating thing, because what do you eat? You eat a food, it has like 10 food additives in it, right? So are we going to go after colors? Are we going to, so, and how do you test that in an animal model? We can't test those things. When these food additives came on the market, this idea of making sure that they're safe it was all set that way. And this is I think we're going to get better speakers that know a ton more than I do. In other countries, people say, well, other countries, these are not allowed. So the U.S. is just lax. They let anything by because they're industrialized. We just don't have any data on that at all. So, but this came from Maha's the first one that I have seen where they're saying, ADHD and an ultra-processed food diet. But, this, to me, the tie-in with the food additives is just they're saying, hey, that's part of this ultra-processed food exposure. It's probably the food additives that are doing it.
All right. Time for one more, if not.
Thank you for your great talk.
Thanks.
I just have a question about, I think a lot of this has to do with societal perceptions of risk. So in the U.S., you largely have to prove or demonstrate that something is harmful in order to show that it can be regulated or banned or limited. And in other places, like Europe, or I think mostly of regulatory standards in Japan, you have to prove that it is not harmful. Could I ask you, from your experience, you have a tremendous amount of experience in how these guidelines are formulated and things. Could I ask you to talk about these societal perceptions of risk in the U.S. versus other contexts?
Yeah, no, everybody looks to the U.S., right? But you're correct that other people regulate food additives, all these products differently. They have and I'll just give you one example. The frustration I have with tearing down the government is the NHANES data set that we have that gives us most of the data around the world. Everybody goes to an NHANES data set where we can look at exposure of foods in the U.S. in different, across a really diverse group. Public data set is done by CDC, So I think a lot of what we do, FDA, to dismantle FDA and say, let's get rid of grass or anything that's not working, that's really wrong. It's not that other countries are doing it better, but every country is really different. So I just know, and I'll talk about the whole grains because I had a lot of experience when the dietary guidelines recommended whole grains. Great, right? That's something I want. And then I was actually asked to go to different countries to say, are we going to have policy on whole grains? Present your data. And then a lot of the countries, I won't even speak of the countries I went to, they're like, if the U.S. believes that there should be a recommendation for whole grains, we're probably good on it too. So, to me, the dietary patterns is much easier than going after these specific food additives because that's a really different regulatory, and the people in this crowd know a lot more of how to get alternative sweeteners and how to prove there's any harm for those sweeteners. So to me, it's a toolkit, giving consumers a toolkit for alternative sweeteners to get rid of sugar, and we want to make sure that it's safe for all these different populations, but every country is going to do their own approval. So luckily there's people here that know a lot more than me, so thanks.
Sorry, and
Yes.
This is probably going to be more of a comment than a question to, thanks, Joanne. But just to clarify, I think there's, going back to your comment about there's a different perception in how do we change perception. I think one of the perceptions is that the U.S. does not have a regulatory system that mandates a pre-market safety assessment, and that's not true. In fact, the U.S., it's definitely different, like Joanne said, it's different from Europe, but there's still a regulatory obligation to demonstrate the safety of every food ingredient before it goes on market. So here in the U.S., it's different. than how they regulate it in other places, but it is not only a post-market assessment in the U.S. You don't have to, it's not just about showing harm is the only way to get food ingredients off market. Like, you have to demonstrate safety before it goes on market.
Thank you.
Thank you.